Mr. Speaker, thank you. I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that it is exceedingly rare that I would agree with the member for Swazell Saltibus, as I do on this occasion. But I want to take a slight departure from the main thrust of his argument, though I believe that we may in fact end up at the same junction, albeit for different reasons. Mr. Speaker, I have, particularly over the last couple of years, emphasized to honorable members the absolute necessity for parliamentarians to guard their power and their authority very carefully. I said that, Mr. Speaker, to emphasize that we are in constant danger of surrendering and abdicating our responsibilities as legislators. And nowhere is this more apparent than our efforts to hand over our powers and authority to public servants, public officers, because they believe we are tainted. But it is even more apparent when it comes to the courts of sedition and judges generally. Let me rephrase that. When it comes to judges, Mr. Speaker, I'm aware of the tension that exists, particularly in respect of the sentencing powers of judges. And increasingly over the years, what we have seen is a tendency among judges to carve out for themselves the power to sentence and actually to even ignore Parliament's prescriptions regarding sentencing and sentencing procedures. The courts find refuge in the Constitution. They cite separation of powers. They cite the rule of law. They cite the need to ensure protection of the law, and they cite too, when it suits their purposes, ensuring that citizens receive fair and balanced treatment. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have responded in Parliament by conceding to that argument. We don't contest it. So even in instances where the legislation says that the sentencing power of the judge should be imposing a sentence of a maximum of 10 years in prison, the courts come back, the judges come back and tell you that you cannot tell them what the maximum sentence must be. All you can do is to give a discretion. So Parliament is compelled, and Parliament says that you may impose a sentence of 5 years minimum and a maximum of 8 years, or whatever the case ought to be. We're in a mess today over the issue of bail in this country. And constantly, Mr. Speaker, we experience a situation where persons who have convictions of one kind or another go before the courts to seek bail to avoid jail prior to the offenses being heard and determined. The courts have insisted that there's a constitutional right to bail. And what we now have is a problem where individuals who have committed multiple offenses, who have been sometimes found guilty of these offenses, they repeat the same offenses, then once they are arrested for another offense, they promptly apply to the courts for bail, and what you have is a situation that persons who have committed crimes of one kind or another once again are released from the prisons to stalk the streets and to resume their activities. The judges tell you there's a constitutional right to bail. Now, I think part of the problem is that as much as the judges tell you they have a constitutional right to bail, I don't see anywhere in the Constitution where that right has been given. But I am prepared to say that part of the problem is that we have refused to work even within those boundaries to see what the limitations can be and what their boundaries could be. So when I see an amendment, and I have no doubt that the Prime Minister is very well intentioned, the Cabinet of Ministers is very well intentioned, the government is very well intentioned, but I think when these things arise, we all need to stick a pin and ask the fundamental question. Should we be denying the legitimately elected members of Parliament the right to offer prescriptions to the problems that we have? Should we be denying legislators the right to say what a sentence should be for an offense? Should we? And why is it that we are giving judges more and more the power to legislate and make decisions for us? A judge exists to judge on what the legal prescriptions are, not to make new law constantly on his or her own. That is why I would support the St. Lucia Civil Code any day, and I reject any and all attempts by English-trained lawyers to abandon the Civil Code in preference of the common law. Because the Civil Code is written law. It is what Parliament and the people of St. Lucia want to be their law. The law should not be in the breasts and in the minds of judges. And so, Mr. Speaker, I share the reservations of the Honourable Member for Swazelle, but in a different direction, because we are ceding, we are abdicating, we are extending powers of judges where that should not be the case. I want the right to be able to say what the sentence should be. Just like I want the right to be able to say you should hang for murder. I want that right. And the rules regarding the sentencing for murder is a classic case in point, you know. All those constitutions made provisions for persons to be hanged, all of them. But what has happened? The British judges, in furtherance of the objectives of the British government, decided that they will do away with hanging as a sentencing power. The House of Lords, once that had been done, proceeded to give their usual judgments. The Privy Council, who basically are comprised of judges who were legislators in the House of Lords in the UK, immediately took up the issue and imposed the requirements to do as best as they can to stop hanging in the Caribbean, because they saw it was part of their ideological rebate to bring an end to hanging. That's why we have this problem. And if you go through the history of the cases, you will see every effort, every step of the way to whittle down, to whittle down, to whittle down, until they have now reached the point that they argue and say that hanging is inhumane punishment. It's a form of torture, and therefore is prohibited by the Westminster constitutions that you have. It's disallowed under your Bill of Rights. And of course, our judges are compelled to follow and obey the Privy Council, and so this has been the march. I just want to emphasize, Mr. Speaker, that we have to be very careful of the constant encroachment of the authority of this parliament, of the members of this parliament. The time is going to come when you're going to ask yourselves, what were you elected for and what are you supposed to do? I really feel that there is an issue. And I simply want to urge it, as much as I understand why this is necessary, but to say that the court may impose a sentence it deems appropriate is to put the judge in the place of a legislator, and in fact to allow the judge to tell you what the outcome should be. No wonder we have the kind of problems that we are having now, because people are not even respecting judges. And this society is imploding because, you see, judges are going in one direction, and those who are entrusted to make laws for the country are going in a different direction. And that is what is happening. That is what is happening. I am one of those who believe that the problems we have with crime has as much to do with politicians and police officers as it has to do with the courts. Because the vital strategic support that is needed in the courts, you are not getting it. And no one wants to say it. No one wants to say it. No one has the guts to say it. And I assume that you will hear Kenny Anthony this again, Kenny Anthony that. I don't mind. I've always said so. I do not mind. I protect the courts and judges to the hilt. I protect their independence. Even when they make wrong decisions, and I recognize they are wrong decisions, I will still protect a judge. But you have to draw the line. That is correct. There is a however. You have to draw the line. Judges should not be cast in the mold of legislators. That ought never to be their remit. And so, as much as I sympathize, I understand, to some extent I find common ground with the member for Swazell, but for different reasons. For different reasons. I'm concerned about the abdication of legislative authority. That is what I am concerned about. And I want to say to this parliament, you better guard the authority you have jealously. One of the days you're going to wake up and you find that even your power to make laws have been taken away from you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.